My daughter looked me dead in the eye and said, "Dad, your heart just can't handle the cabin pressure on a flight. You need to stay right here and make sure the lawn doesn't die." 2 weeks later, when she returned from her luxury vacation in Hawaii, she discovered her future inheritance had been turned into a vacant lot. As I sat in Rome, sipping a vintage red wine, I watched my phone screen light up with her 55th missed call. If you have ever been underestimated by the very people you raised, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button right now. My name is Garrison Ford. I'm 72 years old, and I'm about to show you how I reminded my ungrateful family that the man who builds the foundation can just as easily press the button to bring it all down. The Seattle morning air was crisp, carrying that familiar scent of pine and damp earth blowing in from Lake Washington. Usually, on a morning like this, I'd be sitting on the deck with a black coffee, enjoying the house I built with my own 2 hands 30 years ago. But today, the peace was shattered by a massive black Uber XL idling in the driveway, its tires crunching on the gravel alongside the rolling click of designer luggage. My son-in-law, Todd, was wrestling with 3 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases, trying to jam them into the trunk. He's 40, wearing a tracksuit that cost more than my first pickup truck, and sweating profusely despite the cool breeze. I stood on the porch, passport gripped tight in one hand and a small carry-on bag in the other. I traveled light, just a few shirts, my blood pressure medication, and the framed photo of my late wife, Catherine. That goes everywhere with me. This was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. 2 weeks in Maui to celebrate my 72-year milestone. At least, that's what they told me 3 months ago when I cut the check for the tickets. Net, Eudius. Todd slammed the trunk lid shut, wiped his brow, and looked up at me with an expression that was a terrible mix of annoyance and pity. He glanced at his gold watch, a flashy piece of junk bought with the commission from the only house he managed to sell last year. "We're running late, Garrison," Todd snapped, refusing to make eye contact. "The driver is already charging us a wait fee." I took a step forward, my hand gripping the porch railing. The wood felt solid under my palm. I'd sanded and stained that railing myself. I knew every grain, every knot. I started down the steps, ready to hand my bag to the driver, when my daughter Vanessa stepped out of the house. She was wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and oversized sunglasses that completely hid her eyes. She planted herself right in front of me, blocking the path to the car, and placed a hand on my chest. Her nails were perfectly manicured in a sharp, jarring shade of crimson. "Dad, we need to talk," she said. Her voice had that sickly sweet, manipulative tone she always used when she either wanted a handout or was about to deliver terrible news. It was the exact same voice she used at 16 when she totaled my sedan. "Talk about what?" I asked. "The flight leaves in 3 hours. We need to get through security." Vanessa let out a long, theatrical sigh, her breath smelling of mint chewing gum. "Todd and I stayed up all night talking, and we're just so worried about you. We called Dr. Evans this morning. He said that with your blood pressure, a 6-hour flight over the ocean at that cabin pressure is incredibly dangerous. It could literally trigger MAPSEV cardiac arrest." I stared at her, my grip tightening on my passport. "Vanessa, Dr. Evans retired 3 years ago. He lives in Florida and plays golf all day. I saw Dr. Patel last week, and he told me I have the heart of a 50-year-old. I already ran 3 miles this morning, while you two were still asleep." Todd stepped in, looming over my shoulder like a shadow. He liked to use his height to bully people. But he forgot that I spent 40 years on construction sites, dealing with union reps and building inspectors who were infinitely tougher than a failed real estate agent. Look, Garrison, it's non-negotiable, Todd said, dropping his voice an octave to sound authoritative. We can't take responsibility for you having a medical emergency at 30,000 feet. It would ruin the trip for everyone, especially Mia. You don't want to traumatize your granddaughter, do you? At the mention of Mia, I looked toward the back seat of the SUV. My 16-year-old granddaughter was sitting there, headphones on, staring out the window, looking utterly miserable. She caught my eye and gave a small, helpless wave. I knew instantly that they had told her I decided not to go. They'd lied to her, too. So, what's the plan, then? I asked, keeping my voice entirely flat. I learned a long time ago in negotiations that the first person to raise their voice loses. You stay here. It's for the best, Dad, Vanessa said quickly. And before I could even process the movement, she snatched the passport right out of my hand. She slid it into her purse with practiced ease. We upgraded Mia to your business class seat. She needs the space to study. You know how important her grades are. You upgraded her? I repeated. With my ticket? The $4,000 ticket I paid for? It's a sunk cost, Garrison, Todd said, waving his hand dismissively. Don't be petty. We're doing this for your health. Besides, the house needs watching. We canceled the landscaping service to save some money, so you'll need to water the lawn every morning. And Buster needs walking. You know how cruel it is to put a dog in a kennel. They were leaving me behind to be a gardener and a dog sitter. I looked up at the house. It was a 5-bedroom estate on a prime waterfront lot. In today's market, it was easily worth $3 million. I built it for Catherine. I poured the foundation, raised the beams, and laid the roof. Now my daughter and her husband were acting like they owned the place, and I was just the live-in maintenance man. Fine, I said. I'll stay. Have a good time in Hawaii. I turned to walk back up the steps, but Vanessa grabbed my arm again. Her grip was surprisingly tight. Wait, Dad. One more thing. Since we're going to be gone for 2 weeks and you'll be here alone, we need to make sure everything is secure. If any packages arrive, or if there's an issue with the city or utilities, you need to be able to sign for it. She reached into her bag, reaching right past my stolen passport, and pulled out a document folded into a tight square. She unfolded it and smoothed it out against the hood of the Uber. It was a single-page dense with legal text. Todd handed me a pen. Just sign right here at the bottom, she said, pointing to a line labeled Authorized Signatory. It just gives you permission to sign for certified mail and handle minor repairs while we're unreachable. You know how strict the HOA is. I looked down at the paper. The morning sun was reflecting harshly off the white surface, making the fine print difficult to read. Todd was tapping his foot impatiently. Come on, Garrison. The driver's gotta go, Todd barked. Just sign the piece of paper. It's for the mail. Stop being paranoid. Vanessa smiled again. Please, Dad, just for my peace of mind. I don't want to be relaxing on the beach, wondering if the house is falling apart. I looked back at the car. Mia had taken her headphones off and was watching us. She looked frightened. Not of me, but for me. That look told me everything I needed to know. I took the pen. I leaned over the hood of the car, and I signed my name, Garrison Ford. Thanks, Dad, Vanessa squealed. She snatched the paper away, blew on the ink, and shoved it deep into her bag. She planted a kiss on my cheek, but her lips barely brushed my skin. It felt entirely cold. "We'll call you when we land," Todd said as he climbed into the front seat. "Don't forget the lawn and don't let Buster dig up the roses." The car doors slammed shut. The tinted windows rolled up. I stood in the driveway and watched the black SUV pull away. It rounded the corner and disappeared, leaving me entirely alone in the shadow of the house I built. The silence that followed was heavy. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a lakeside morning. It was the dead quiet of a crime scene after the perpetrators had fled. I stood there for a long time. The morning breeze picked up, rustling dead leaves across the concrete. I'd need to sweep that. It was probably on the list of chores Vanessa left on the kitchen counter. I turned and walked up the stairs. My knees didn't ache, my breath wasn't short. My heart beat steady and strong. A weak heart, they had said. I pushed open the heavy oak front door and stepped into the foyer. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Usually at this hour, Todd would be shouting at the TV, watching financial news and cursing his bad luck, while Vanessa operated a blender, making green smoothies that smelled like grass. Now, the space felt vast and empty. I walked into the kitchen, sitting on the marble island. An island I had personally selected from a quarry in Italy 20 years ago. Was a notepad. Vanessa's handwriting was loopy and aggressive. Dad's chores: 1. Water the lawn at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Do not use the sprinklers, it wastes water. 2. Buster gets exactly 1 cup of kibble. No treats, he's on a diet. 3. Collect the mail daily. Stack it on Todd's desk. 4. If the pool guy comes, tell him to return in 2 weeks. We haven't paid him yet. I read through the list. A laugh caught in my throat, but it was dry and bitter. They were treating me like an employee. They were looking for an excuse to fire me. I walked through the living room. The furniture was all theirs. Modern, uncomfortable beige couches that cost a fortune and looked like they'd stain if you stared at them too hard. When they moved in 3 years ago, it was supposed to be for a few months until Todd got his business off the ground. 3 years later, hit a Audi, the rain, they had taken over the primary suite and relegated me to the downstairs guest room. They called it the mother-in-law suite to make it sound nice, but I knew what it really was. It was displacement. I stepped into Todd's office. This used to be my den. It used to be lined with mahogany bookshelves filled with history texts and architectural manuals. Now, those shelves were cluttered with binders from Todd's get-rich-quick seminars and motivational trophies he'd bought for himself. I sat in his chair. It creaked under my weight. Cheap craftsmanship. I looked at the desk. It was a disaster of unpaid bills and past due notices. Todd always intercepted the mail before I could see it, but he was careless. He left things lying around. I thought about the paper I had just signed. Just for the mail, Vanessa had said. Just for utility chores. I am a general contractor. I was reading contracts before Todd was even a thought in his mother's mind. I know that a document granting someone the right to collect mail doesn't require a notarized signature block. And it doesn't require legal jargon about power of attorney. I reached into my front pocket. I hadn't signed the paper they gave me. I had pulled a classic sleight of hand. When I leaned over the hood of the car, I substituted their document with a receipt from my pocket. I signed the receipt. I kept their paper tucked safely in my palm. They were in such a rush, blinded by their own arrogance and the urgency of getting to the airport lounge, that they hadn't even checked. I pulled the folded document from my pocket. I reached into the desk drawer and pulled out my magnifying glass. My eyesight is good, but for the fine print, I trust the lens. I spread the paper across the desk, smoothing out the creases. I began to read. It wasn't a mail authorization form. It wasn't a permission slip for the HOA. At the top of the page, in bold capital letters, it read, "Durable. Power of attorney." I felt a cold chill wash over my chest that had absolutely nothing to do with the air conditioning. I read further. The terms were incredibly specific and chillingly thorough. Here be grants the attorney-in-fact, Todd Miller, full power and authority to act on my behalf, to sell, transfer, mortgage, or otherwise dispose of any real property, to access, withdraw from, and close any bank accounts, investment portfolios, or retirement funds, and to make medical decisions, including the consent to admission to an assisted living or long-term care facility. I leaned back in the chair. The leather groaned. They weren't just going on vacation. They went to Hawaii to celebrate a coup. They wanted me to sign away my life, my home, and my freedom on the hood of an Uber. If I had signed that paper, Todd could have sold this house while sitting poolside in Maui. He could have drained my savings accounts to pay off his debts. Debts I knew he had, despite his clumsy attempts to hide them. He could have committed me to Sunshine Pines, the state-run facility 3 towns over, where the smell of bleach never quite covers the scent of despair. They wanted to erase me. They thought I was a senile old man who belonged in a garden patch, watching game shows. They thought I was weak. They thought the man who built an empire out of a toolbox was now just a signature waiting to be harvested. I looked at the date on the document. It was dated for today. They had planned this. They had drawn it up weeks ago. They probably paid some lawyer, some shady guy Todd met at a bar, to draft it. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out over the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the gray sky. I saw my reflection in the glass. I didn't see a victim. I saw Garrison Ford. I saw the man who once fired an entire crew for stealing copper wire. I saw the man who finished a roofing job with a broken ankle because the client needed to move in on time. I was not going to be a victim in my own home. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Vanessa. Landed in SF for layover. Hope you are relaxing, Dad. Don't forget the mail. Love you. I stared at the screen. Love. They didn't know the meaning of the word. They loved my assets. They loved my liquidity. They loved the roof over their heads. But they didn't love me. I walked back to the desk. I wasn't angry. Anger is a waste of energy. Anger makes things messy. I needed to be precise. I needed to be a demolition expert. You don't just swing a sledgehammer at a load-bearing wall. You find the stress points. You place the charges. You control the collapse. I turned on Todd's computer. He hadn't logged out. He never logged out. His password was probably Millionaire1. It was pathetic. I opened his email. I searched for the word loan. The results flooded the screen instantly. Dozens of emails, but the most recent one caught my eye. It was from Quick Capital Hard Money Lenders. Subject: Loan Approval, 32 Lakeview Lane. I clicked it open. Mr. Miller, following up on our discussion, we are prepared to approve the $200,000 bridge loan against the equity of 32 Lakeview Lane. The monthly interest rate will be 15%. We understand. You will provide the power of attorney and the property deed transfer upon your return from Hawaii. Funds will be wired to your account this Friday. Friday. That was 2 days from now. Todd had already spent the money in his head. He was borrowing $200,000 against my house, using a power of attorney, I hadn't signed to secure a loan on a property he didn't own. He was gambling with my life. He was going to use that money to bail himself out and fund their lavish lifestyle. And when the predatory loan came due, he'd sell the house to cover it and drop me at Sunshine Pines. It was a beautiful plan. Nefarious, but beautiful. It just had one flaw. He didn't have my signature. I looked around the room. This wasn't my home anymore. This was a crime scene in progress. This was a prison they were building for me, using my own money to finance the renovation. I picked up the phone. I didn't call Vanessa. I didn't call the police either. Not yet. The police would call it a civil matter. They'd call it a family dispute. No, I needed a shark. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 10 years. Pinter and Associates. Attorneys at law, the receptionist answered. Put me through to Arthur Pinter, I said. Tell him Garrison Ford is on the line. Tell him I'm ready to trigger the trust clauses. I hung up. I looked down at the power of attorney document on the desk. I picked up Todd's lighter, the one he used for the cigars he smoked when he thought I wasn't home. I lit the corner of the paper. I watched the flame consume the text. I watched the words full power and authority turn to black ash. I dropped it into the metal wastebasket and watched it burn until there was nothing left. Vanessa wanted me to take care of the house. Todd wanted me to handle minor repairs. Fine. I would handle it permanently. They thought I was too old to fly. They thought I was ground crew. They were about to find out that I controlled the airspace, and their flight was about to be permanently canceled. I grabbed a trash bag. I walked into Vanessa's closet, where she kept her designer bags. Hermes, Chanel, Gucci. Thousands of dollars of leather sitting on shelves I built. I opened the bag and started sweeping them in. It was time to clear the site. The hallway leading back to the den was dark, and the silence of the empty house felt heavy, like a wet wool blanket. Wool blanket. I stood before the door that used to lead to my sanctuary. For 20 years, that room had been my library, my retreat, the place where I drew up blueprints for half the commercial buildings in downtown Seattle. I'd hung that door myself, set on heavy brass hinges that never squeaked. Now, it was locked. Todd had installed a cheap digital keypad lock on it, the kind of plastic battery-operated gadget you buy at a hardware store when you want to play at being secure. It was an insult to the solid oak door. I didn't have the code, and I certainly wasn't going to call my son-in-law in Hawaii to ask for it. I walked out to the garage and retrieved my toolbox. The leather bag was old and worn, smooth by decades of grease and sweat. I pulled out a flathead screwdriver and a small Allen wrench. Todd thought digital meant secure. He didn't understand that a lock is only as strong as the screws holding it to the frame. It took me less than 2 minutes to bypass the mechanism, catching the screws in my palm before they could hit the floor. I pulled the handle out, exposing the latch, and turned it manually. The door clicked open. The smell hit me first. It was stale cigar smoke mixed with the distinct scent of nervous sweat. The room was a disaster. My mahogany bookshelves were cluttered with unopened mail and half-eaten protein bars. The beautiful drafting table I had used to design this very house was buried under a mountain of glossy brochures for get-rich-quick seminars and luxury car rental flyers. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. I didn't turn on the overhead light. The street lamps outside cast long, jagged shadows through the blinds, slicing across the room. I walked over to the desk. The surface was a chaotic mess of papers, but I ignored them for now. My focus was on the computer tower humming beneath the desk. The monitor was asleep, a dark square reflecting my own tired face. I tapped the spacebar. The screen flickered to life. Todd hadn't logged out. He never logged out. He was the kind of man who assumed he was the smartest person in any room, and therefore never took basic precautions. His browser was open, displaying 19 different tabs. I sat in his chair. The leather felt sticky. I felt like an intruder in my own home, but I reminded myself that they were the intruders. They were the parasites. And I was the host finally waking up to the infection. I started clicking through the tabs. The first few were harmless enough. A fantasy football league. A tracking page for a Gucci shipment. A listing for a Porsche 911 he was clearly daydreaming about. But then I saw the banking tab. I clicked on his checking account. The balance was in the red. -$400. I clicked on his savings. $12. This was a man driving a leased Range Rover and wearing Italian suits. Yet he didn't have enough liquid cash to fill his gas tank. I switched over to his email. The inbox was a wall of red flags. Final notice, past due, action required. But I wasn't looking for his utility bills. I was looking for the shark. I searched for the sender I had glimpsed earlier. Quick Capital. The email thread opened, and I began reading, from the bottom up. The first message was from 3 weeks ago. Mr. Miller, we have reviewed your application. Due to your credit score of 580 and your current debt-to-income ratio, we cannot offer you a traditional line of credit. However, we can offer a hard money bridge loan secured against real estate equity. I scrolled up. Todd's response was frantic. I have equity. It's a waterfront property on Lake Washington, appraised at over $3 million. I need $200,000 in cash by the end of the month. I can cover the points. My hand tightened on the mouse. He was leveraging my home. A home he didn't own. A home with my name on the deed. I kept reading. The lender's reply was predatory. We can do this. Since you are not on the title, we will require a durable power of attorney from the owner, Mr. Garrison Ford, granting you full rights to encumber the property. The interest rate will be 15% monthly, due on the 1st of each month. Failure to pay will result in immediate foreclosure proceedings. 15% monthly. That wasn't a loan, that was financial ruin. Annualized, that's loan shark territory. That's 180% interest. Todd wasn't just borrowing money, he was lighting a fuse. If he missed a single payment, they wouldn't just send a collection agency. They would take the house, they would seize the deed, they would evict me. I scrolled to the final email, sent yesterday. Todd wrote, "The paperwork is handled. We're heading to Hawaii to celebrate. As soon as the wire hits on Friday, I'll transfer the processing fees. Don't worry about the old man. He's completely out of the picture." Out of the picture. That was me. The man who taught him how to tie his tie on his wedding day. The man who paid for the catering. I was just an obstacle to be cleared away. But why did he need the money so desperately? $200,000 was a very specific number. You don't borrow that much cash at 15% interest just to buy handbags. You borrow that kind of money because someone is threatening your livelihood if you don't. I minimized the email and switched back to the browser tabs, immediately recognizing a logo for an online casino. The account was logged in under the username Todd the God. I opened the transaction history, and it was a complete slaughter. There were page after page of deposits for $5,000, $10,000, $20,000. And every single cent was gone. He was playing high-stakes poker and blackjack, losing consistently and frantically chasing his losses. The dates matched up perfectly. Every time he made a sale or pulled a commission, the money went straight into the casino's pockets. Then I found another tab open to an offshore sports betting site. The current balance was negative $140,000. There was an unread message in the site's inbox from a user named Vinny K. The message was brief. "You're out of time, Todd. Friday, or we talk to your wife first, then we pay you a visit." I leaned back in the chair. The air in the room felt suffocating. This wasn't just greed anymore. It was pure desperation. Todd was drowning. He had gambled away everything he owned, plus everything he didn't. He owed serious money to people who don't take no for an answer, and he needed my house to survive. But what about Vanessa? Did she know? I went back to the email system and searched her name, uncovering a conversation from just 2 days ago with the subject line, "Hawaii and Dad." Vanessa wrote, "Are you sure this loan will cover everything? I really want to upgrade to a suite. What about Dad? If we sell the house when we get back, where does he go?" Todd's reply was dismissive. "I told you, babe. This loan clears Vinny and gives us breathing room to flip the house. We put the old man in Sunnyside. I already talked to the director. They have a bed available in the Medicaid wing. It's cheap. We tell him it's temporary while we look for a new place. Once he's in the system, he's their problem." Vanessa replied, "Fine, just make sure it's handled cleanly. I don't want to feel guilty. And make sure he signs the paperwork before we leave. I don't want a scene at the airport." I closed my eyes. A single tear escaped, but I wiped it away before it could fall. My daughter, the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders, the woman I walked down the aisle. She knew. She knew about the gambling, or at least the debt. She knew they were selling my home, and her only concern was that she didn't want to feel guilty. She wanted a clear conscience while abandoning me in a state-run facility. I looked down at the desk again. Underneath a pile of unpaid credit card statements, I spotted a glossy brochure for Sunnyside Care Center. The cover looked cheerful enough, showing smiling seniors playing cards. But I knew Sunnyside. 10 years ago, I did a contracting job there to fix a leaking roof. The place smelled of industrial cleaner and neglect. The staff was overworked and underpaid. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. That was the future they had mapped out for me. A cot in a shared room while they lived off the proceeds of a legacy it took me 30 years to build. A cold, quiet fury settled deep in my chest. It's a familiar feeling. It's the exact sensation you get when you realize the structural integrity of a building has been compromised and the only option left is total demolition. You can't patch over this kind of rot. You can't just paint over it. You have to tear it down. I needed copies. I needed evidence. If I went to the authorities right now, they'd look at this as a civil matter, a family dispute where it's my word against theirs. But if I had these emails and these financial records, I had leverage. I found a USB drive in the desk drawer and plugged it into the tower. Methodically, I began transferring the files. The loan applications, the gambling logs, the emails between Todd and his creditors, and the messages between Todd and Vanessa. I took screenshots of everything and forwarded the most damning files to my own secure email account, one they didn't even know existed. I was systematic and precise, verifying timestamps and organizing the folders labeled evidence, gambling, evidence, Debs, and evidence, collusion. As the files transferred, I looked around the room and saw a framed picture on the shelf. It was Todd and Vanessa on their wedding day, looking blissfully happy. I was in the background, a bit blurry, smiling like a proud father. I picked up the frame, slid the back open, and pulled the photo out. I crumpled it into a tight ball in my fist and tossed it into the trash can. Then I placed the empty frame back on the shelf, face down. Once the transfer was complete, I pulled the USB drive and slid it into my pocket. It felt heavy, like a weapon. I closed out the browser windows, leaving the computer exactly as I had found it. I grabbed the screwdriver and the screws, walked to the door, and reassembled the keypad lock. I tightened the screws until they bit firmly into the wood and tested the handle. It was locked tight. I packed up my tools and used a handkerchief to wipe down the handle, erasing any trace that I had been there. Not because I thought they'd check for fingerprints, but because I wanted absolute to slow part of myself left in that room. That space was a tomb, where their marriage and their morals had died. I walked back down the hallway to the kitchen. The silence had returned to the house. But it felt different now. It was no longer empty, it was waiting. I checked the clock. It was 2 a.m. in Seattle, which meant it was 11 p.m. in Hawaii. They were probably ordering room service, celebrating their cleverness, and raising a glass to the old man they thought they'd outsmarted. I went to the kitchen drawer, pulled out my notepad, and jotted down the figures I'd seen. The loan amount, the interest rates, and the dates. Then I picked up the phone. I dialed Pinter's private line. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Garrison, it's the middle of the night." "Wake up, Arthur," I said. "I have the proof. They're borrowing predatory money against the house to clear illegal debts, and they plan to place me in a facility. I need you to expedite the sale. I want this house gone before they land." There was a long silence on the other end. Then I heard the rustle of sheets and the click of a bedside lamp turning on. "Debts. Predatory loans. Garrison. If they secure a loan against the title before we transfer it to the trust." "They can't," I interrupted. "I didn't sign the power of attorney. They have nothing, but they think they do. They promised the lender the title on Friday. That gives us 48 hours. If they promised that title to dangerous people and can't deliver," Pinter's voice dropped. "Garrison, do you realize what you're doing? If we sell the house out from under them, Todd is going to have to face the people he owes money to." I looked out the window at the dark, rippling water of the lake. I thought about the Sunnyside brochure and Vanessa's cold kiss on my cheek. "I know," I said, "and that is not my problem. This is a contractor dispute, and I am canceling the contract." "All right," Pinter said, his tone switching to purely professional. "I'll have the documents ready by 8:00 a.m. Who is the buyer?" "Call Westlake Development," I instructed. "Tell them I'm accepting the offer they made last year. All cash, $2 million flat. But there is one condition, and it's non-negotiable." "What's that?" "I want the structure leveled immediately. I want the land cleared. When my daughter gets back from Hawaii, I want nothing left here but dirt." "Demolition?" Pinter asked, startled. "Why?" "Because it's my property," I replied coldly. "I built this house with love, and they filled it with lies. I won't leave it standing for them to ruin. It's a scorched earth policy, Arthur." "Scorched earth." I hung up the phone. I stood in the kitchen for a moment longer, then walked to the refrigerator, pulled out a beer, and sat on a bar stool in the dark. I took a long drink. The investigation was over. The demolition was about to begin. The house remained pitch black except for the flickering blue light of the television in the living room. I sat in my recliner, holding the sweating bottle of cold beer, waiting for the signal. It was 7 p.m. in Seattle, which meant late afternoon in Maui. The digital clock on the cable box flipped to 7:15, and right on cue, my phone began to vibrate on the side table. The screen lit up with Vanessa's picture, a heavily filtered selfie from a few years ago, where she looked like a stranger. It was a FaceTime request. I took a deep breath. This was the performance of a lifetime. I had to shed the skin of Garrison Ford, the contractor who could spot a structural flaw from 50 feet away, and become Garrison, the confused, aging retiree who could barely figure out his microwave. I let it ring 3 times to simulate a delayed reaction before sliding my thumb across the screen. I held the phone entirely too close to my face, angling the camera so it only caught my eyebrows and the ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead. "Is this thing on?" I shouted into the screen, faking a hard-of-hearing tone. "I can't see anything. It's dark." "Hello? Vanessa, you there?" I heard a sharp, impatient sigh filter through the speaker. It was a familiar sound, one that used to make me feel guilty, but now it only fueled the quiet fire inside me. "Dad, move the phone back!" Vanessa's voice snapped. "You're aiming the camera at your forehead. Hold it away from you like we practiced." I fumbled with the device, pretending to almost drop it before stabilizing the frame. The screen resolved into crisp, high-definition color. Vanessa was sitting on a balcony, overlooking a brilliant blue ocean. In the background, palm trees swayed, and tiki torches were just starting to flicker. She was wearing a white linen robe that probably cost more than my first monthly mortgage payment, holding a drink garnished with an entire fruit salad. She looked tan, relaxed, and completely oblivious to the fact that her luxury vacation was funded by a desperate gamble. Behind her, I could see Todd pacing the floor. He was in swim trunks and a polo shirt, but he looked like a man walking a tightrope. He was checking his phone nervously, tapping the screen with a frantic rhythm. He wasn't enjoying the view. He was counting down the hours until Friday. "Hi, Dad," Vanessa said, taking a long sip of her cocktail. She puckered her lips. "Ugh, too much rum. Can you believe it? The Four Seasons charges $1,200 a night, and they can't even mix a decent Mai Tai. Service here is going downhill. It took 10 minutes just to get extra towels from the front desk." I forced a bewildered smile onto my face. "Sounds real nice, sweetheart," I said, letting my voice shake slightly. "It's raining here. Just keeps coming down." "Oh!" "Did you say $1,200? That's a lot of money." "Don't worry about the money, Garrison." Todd barked from the background without looking up. "We've got it covered. Listen to Vanessa." "Right," Vanessa said, rolling her eyes. "Dad, did you follow the list? The lawn? The dog?" I nodded slowly, blinking rapidly behind my glasses. Yes, I watered the grass. Buster is fine. He's sleeping in the kitchen. I had some soup. Campbell's tomato. She didn't care about my soup, and she didn't care about the dog. She was circling her target. "That's great." "Dad," she said, her voice dropping back into that sweet tone. "Listen, we were a little worried about that paper we signed at the airport. You know, the mail authorization form. Did you put it somewhere safe?" I paused, letting the silence stretch. I scratched my head and looked away from the camera, as if trying to retrieve a memory from a dusty filing cabinet. "That paper," I mumbled. "The one by the car? Yeah, I signed it. I know I signed it." Todd stopped pacing. He turned toward the camera, his eyes wide and eager. You signed it, Garrison. Great. Where is it? Did you leave it on the desk? I frowned. I think so. Or maybe I put in the kitchen drawer with the takeout menus. No, wait. I might have left it out in the garage toolbox. You know I like to keep important papers out with my tools so they don't get damp. Todd's face turned a deep, furious shade of red. The garage, he shouted. Garrison, that's a legal document. You can't just throw it in a toolbox with greasy wrenches. We need that paper. It has to be pristine. I flinched back, moving the phone away, as if his voice physically hurt me. Don't yell, Todd, I whined, playing the victim. I'm trying to remember. I'm old. My memory isn't what it used to be. I put it somewhere safe. I just can't remember which drawer. I'll look for it tomorrow. No, Vanessa interrupted, leaning forward so her face filled the screen. Her eyes were entirely cold. No, Dad, you need to find it now, tonight. This is incredibly important. Why is it so important? I asked innocently. It's just for the mail, right? The mailman doesn't come until noon. Vanessa hesitated, glancing back at Todd. They exchanged a look of pure panic. They needed that document physically in hand, or at least scanned and emailed, by Friday morning to secure the loan. If I lost it or ruined it in a toolbox, their entire plan would fall apart. It's not just for the mail, Dad, Vanessa said, her voice tight. We have a friend coming by tomorrow. A friend of Todd's. He needs to pick up that paper. He's going to scan it and send it to us, so we can handle some billing issues. A friend? I asked. Who? Vanessa, you know I don't like strangers in the house. It makes me nervous. He's not a stranger, Todd yelled, leaning into the frame next to Vanessa. His name is Mr. Black. He's a consultant. He'll be there around 10:30 a.m. tomorrow. You just let him in, give him the paper, and he'll leave. It's simple. Don't talk to him. Just give him the document. Mr. Black. It sounded like an alias, or perhaps an appraiser, or maybe a representative sent to verify the asset. Whoever he was the next step in their plan. They were sending someone to the house, and I was supposed to play the part of the compliant caretaker. I don't know, Todd, I said, shaking my head. I have to prune the roses tomorrow. I might be out in the garden. I might not hear the door bell. Dad, listen to me. Vanessa hissed, her voice dropping into a menacing whisper. You have to stay inside. You have to find that paper tonight and leave it on the kitchen table. When Mr. Black arrives, you hand it to him. If you don't do this, if you mess this up, we might have to come home early, and we will be very, very upset. Do you want us to be upset? Do you want to ruin my vacation? The threat was clear. It was the way you talk to a disobedient child. Comply or face the consequences. I lowered my head, looking thoroughly chastised. No, sweetheart. I don't want to ruin your trip. I'll look for it. I'll find it. Good, Vanessa said, leaning back and taking another sip of her drink, her relief palpable. Just find it, and Dad, try not to make a mess of the kitchen. Mr. Black is a professional, and we don't want him thinking the house looks like a pigsty. I stared at her pixelated face. She was sitting in a paradise funded by my potential homelessness, worrying about the cleanliness of the kitchen in a house she planned to sell behind my back. I understand, I said. I'll clean up. I'll be ready. All right. We have dinner reservations at Nomad, Todd said, checking his watch again. We gotta go. Find the paper, Garrison. Don't let us down. The screen went black. The call was over. I lowered the phone to my lap, the bumbling old man act vanishing instantly as I sat up straight. My eyes adjusted to the dim light of the living room. So they were sending a friend tomorrow. Mr. Black. I knew exactly who that was. It wasn't a courier. It was the appraiser for the hard money lender. Quick Capital wasn't going to wire $200,000 without someone physically verifying the property. They needed to confirm the equity, ensure the house wasn't falling into the lake, and check the interior. And Todd told him I'd be home, compliant, and clueless. Just give him the paper, Todd had said. I looked at the empty fireplace, remembering the ashes of the document burning in the den trash can. I didn't have that paper. And even if I wanted to give it to this Mr. Black, I couldn't. But that was fine, because I had something else for him. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, grabbing a fresh bottle of water from the fridge. I hadn't been eating soup. Earlier today, I'd ordered a thick ribeye steak from the local butcher. Tonight, I was going to grill it on the deck and have a proper meal. I needed to keep my strength up. Tomorrow was going to be a very busy day. I had a meeting with Pinter at 8:30 a.m., the demolition crew on standby for the afternoon, and an appointment with Mr. Black at 10:00 a.m. I wasn't going to let him inside, and I wasn't going to hand him a piece of paper. I was going to use him. I walked out onto the deck. The night air was turning cool, and the lights from the other houses along the lake flickered like stars. Inside them were families living their lives, completely unaware of the conflict unfolding at the estate on the hill. I looked at my garden. The roses Vanessa loved so much were in full bloom, deep red and vibrant. I had planted them for her mother. Catherine used to love this garden, spending hours kneeling in the dirt, nurturing life. I'm sorry, Catherine, I whispered into the dark expanse of the lake. But the rot goes too deep. We have to clear the lot. I walked back inside and locked the sliding glass door. I left the security system turned off. I wanted Mr. Blackout to come. I wanted him to see the property, but he wouldn't see what Todd had promised him. He would see the reality. I went to the hallway closet, pulled out my old work boots, and set them by the door, along with my best flannel shirt and canvas work pants. Tomorrow, I wasn't Garrison, the retiree. Tomorrow, I was Garrison, the foreman. I checked my phone one last time. No new messages. They were probably at dinner now, ordering the most expensive items on the menu and charging it to a card they expected me to pay off, eventually. Let them eat. Let them drink. Let them think they've won. I turned off the downstairs lights and climbed the stairs to the guest room. I wasn't sleeping in the primary bedroom. That was their domain now, tainted by their greed. I slept in the small room downstairs, the one meant for guests. It was simple and clean. I lay down on the bed and closed my eyes. I didn't need any sleep aids. I had a plan, and a man with a plan always sleeps soundly. Tomorrow, the clearing of the site would begin, and Mr. Black was going to have a front row seat. The morning mist rolled in thick and gray off Lake Washington, hanging like damp cotton in the Douglas firs. It was 9:45 a.m. I stood in the driveway, dressed in my oldest pair of canvas work pants and a flannel shirt that had seen more than a decade of weather. I had a pair of pruning shears in my hand and a baseball cap pulled low over my eyes. I didn't look like Garrison Ford, the owner of a $3 million estate. I looked like hired help. I was invisible. I positioned myself strategically near the front door, pretending to clip the dead blooms off the rhododendrons. It was a mindless task, but it gave me a perfect view of the driveway. My heart beat in a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs, carrying the exact same sense of anticipation I used to feel right before a demolition charge detonated. Right at 10 a.m., a matte black Dodge Charger turned off the main road and crunched over the gravel of my driveway. It was an aggressive car with heavily tinted windows and bright chrome rims. The kind of vehicle driven by someone who wants you to know he collects debts for a living. The engine roared to a halt, the driver's side door swung open, and Mr. Black stepped out. He was no courier, and he certainly wasn't a friend. He was a man in his late 30s, wearing a suit that was too tight and sunglasses that were too expensive. He had a Bluetooth earpiece tucked into his ear, a digital laser measurer in one hand, and a clipboard in the other. He'd sat there. He looked at the house the way a butcher looks at a prize cow, evaluating exactly where to make the first cut. I kept my head down, snipping at a branch that didn't need cutting, watching him out of the corner of my eye. He walked to the front of the car and looked around. He didn't see the lake view or the craftsmanship of the stonework I'd laid myself. He saw equity. He saw a payday. He spotted me and walked over, his shoes crunching loudly on the gravel. There was no handshake or introduction. "Hey, old man," he called out roughly. "Is the owner home?" I looked up, adjusting my glasses and playing confused, letting my mouth hang open slightly. "The owner," I repeated slowly, letting a deliberate tremor shake my voice. "Mr. Miller. He's in Hawaii, on the islands. Big vacation." Mr. Black scoffed. "Yeah, I know where he is. I mean the other one, his father-in-law. Ford. Is he inside?" I pointed a trembling finger at my own chest. "Mr. Ford is inside, sleeping. He sleeps a lot. I'm just here for the yard, keeping it green." Black dismissed me with a look. "Good. Let him sleep. I don't need him wandering around asking questions anyway. I'm just here for an exterior appraisal. Todd authorized it." He waved a piece of paper at me. I recognized it instantly as a digital printout of the email I'd seen the night before. It wasn't a power of attorney. It was just a note from Todd saying, "Go ahead and inspect the property. The old man won't bother you." "Go right ahead, sir," I said, turning back to my bushes. "I'll just be here clipping." Ignoring me completely, Black began walking the perimeter of the house. He raised his laser measurer, shooting distances from the corner of the garage to the property line. He moved quickly, knowing exactly what he was looking for. He wasn't checking the quality of the build. He was verifying the square footage against the county records to confirm the collateral. I followed him at a respectful distance, moving from one shrub to another, as if working down a line. I needed to be close enough to hear him speak. He rounded the corner toward the back deck, letting out a low whistle when he saw the lake view. "Not bad, Todd," he muttered to himself. "Not bad at all." Right then, his phone rang. He tapped his earpiece. "Yeah," he said, "I'm on site now." I froze behind a large hydrangea bush, stopping my clipping and holding my breath. "Yeah, Vinny, it's real," Black said into his earpiece. "The place is huge, right on the water, easily $3 million in this market. No problem. The equity is definitely there to cover the $200,000 loan, plus the points." Vinny. That was the name from the sports betting site. This wasn't a bank appraiser. It was an associate of the person Todd owed money to. Black walked onto the deck, testing the sturdiness of the wood with his heel and leaning against the railing I had built. "Yeah, access is clear," he continued. "The place is basically empty. Just a gardener out here, and the old man is inside asleep. Todd says he's senile. Says he doesn't know a foreclosure notice from a pizza coupon." My hand tightened on the pruning shears until my knuckles turned white. senile. That was the narrative they were creating to justify their actions to themselves. Black let out a short laugh. Yeah, the paperwork is the only catch. Todd says he's emailing the durable power of attorney Friday morning. As soon as the wire clears, he signs the deed over to the shell company. We hold it in escrow until he clears the principal, but we both know he can't pay it back. He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. Yeah, Vinny, I know. If he defaults next month, we evict. He paused again. What about the old guy? I stepped closer, ignoring the rose thorns scratching at my cheek. This was the moment. This was the verdict. Black nodded. Yeah, Todd gave me the details on that. Sunnyside. Right, the facility off Highway 9. He's got a bed reserved in Wing D. Wing D. I knew Sunnyside, and I knew Wing D. That wasn't assisted living. That wasn't the memory care unit where they played old music. Wing D was the secure ward for indigent patients with severe behavioral issues. A lockdown facility where patients were heavily medicated to keep them quiet. It was a place where people were sent to be forgotten. Black kept talking. Yeah. Todd says the old man gets combative sometimes. Says we might need to sedate him just to get him out of the house. He authorized us to use the transport team. You know, the guys we used for that eviction in Renton. The heavy-handed ones. A cold sweat broke out across my back. They weren't just planning to move me. They were planning to take me by force. They intended to medicate me, drag me from my own home, and dump me in a locked ward, where any protest would just be viewed as a symptom of dementia. Black laughed again. Yeah, Vinny, it's cold, but business is business. Todd just wants the cash. He says the old man is a liability and has lived long enough anyway. If he lasts 6 months in Wing D, it'll be a miracle. The infection rates there, let's just say it's cost-effective. Cost-effective. That phrase changed everything, turning my shock into a hardened, lethal resolve. They weren't just stealing my house. They were handing me a death sentence, a slow, lonely end in a room that smelled of chemicals and neglect. They wanted to erase my mind with medication and my life with a signature. And my daughter Vanessa had agreed to it. She knew. Just make sure it's handled cleanly, she had said. I don't want to feel guilty. Sending me to Wing D wasn't clean, it was an execution. Black turned and started walking back toward the front of the house. All right, Vinny, I've seen enough. The asset is solid. Tell Todd the loan is approved pending the paperwork Friday. I'll call him now. I waited for him to round the corner before I moved, choosing not to follow this time. I didn't need to hear any more. I had already heard my own obituary. I stood in the shadow of the house I built, looking at the timber I had cut and the stone I had laid. They were just building materials now. Right now, it was a cage. I walked back to the front driveway just as Black was getting into his Charger. He rolled down the window. Hey, gardener, he called out. I looked up, slipping the blank, confused mask back over my face. Yes, sir. Tell Mr. Ford he's got visitors coming Friday. Tell him to pack a bag, a small one. He grinned, showing too many teeth. Where he's going, he won't need much. He slammed the gas, his tires kicking up gravel as he sped down the road. I watched his taillights disappear around the bend. I stood there for a long time. The morning silence returned, but the bird song sounded different now. It sounded like a warning. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, not from age or fear, but from pure, unadulterated rage. Pack a bag, he had said. I turned to look at the house. I wasn't going to pack a bag. I wasn't going to Sunnyside. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed Pinter's number. Garrison. Pinter answered on the first ring. Did the appraiser show up? He just left, I said. My voice was steady, but it sounded like it belonged to another man entirely. A dangerous man. It's worse than we thought, Arthur. They're putting me in a lockdown facility. They plan to have me taken by force. Friday. They're coming Friday. Silence stretched over the line. Then Pinter let out a soft curse. A secure ward, Garrison, that's criminal. We need to go to the police. No, I replied. The police will just open a file. They'll investigate. While they do that, Todd will panic and do something incredibly reckless. I don't want an investigation. I want an ending. What do you want to do? Is the paperwork ready? It's on my desk. The trust transfer is complete, and you have sole authorization. Westlake Development sent proof of funds, $2 million cash. They're ready to close. Good, I said. Call them. Tell them the deal is off unless they can get a demolition crew here by noon. Not tomorrow. Today. Noon. Garrison, you can't just. I can. I cut him off. It's my property. I want it gone. I want excavators here in 2 hours. Tell them to cut the utility lines, smash the windows, and wipe this house from existence. What about the furniture? Your things? I'm packing my wife's photos and my clothes, I said. Leave everything else. Let them crush the Italian marble. Let them splinter the custom cabinets. It's all tainted, Arthur. It's all toxic. And Todd, when he finds out, I looked at the spot where Black had parked. He's going to find out he sold a non-existent house to a dangerous creditor who doesn't accept refunds. He dug a grave for me, Arthur, and I'm just making sure he falls into it first. I'll make the call, Pinter said softly. May God have mercy on them, Garrison. This has nothing to do with God, Arthur, I said. It's just business. I hung up. I walked back inside, leaving my mud-caked boots on. I marched across the expensive beige carpets, leaving a trail of dirt. I didn't care anymore. I walked over to the fireplace and picked up the urn holding Catherine's ashes. We're leaving, Katie, I whispered. We're going on a trip, and we're not coming back. I went to my room, pulled out my old military duffel bag, and packed my clothes, my legal documents, and the photo albums. I left everything else. Vanessa's designer bags were still in trash bags in the closet. Todd's motivational trophies sat on the shelves, alongside the big screen television, the designer couches, and the crystal chandeliers. Let it all break. Let it all be crushed. At 11:45 a.m., I heard the rumble. It was a deep, mechanical vibration that resonated through the wooden floors, the unmistakable sound of heavy diesel engines. I slung the duffel bag over my shoulder and walked out the front door. A convoy was rolling up the driveway, led by a massive yellow excavator, its steel bucket gleaming in the sun. A bulldozer and a dump truck followed close behind. The foreman jumped down from his pickup, carrying a clipboard. Mr. Ford? He asked, looking at my work clothes. That's me, I said. We got an expedited order from Westlake. Full demolition, foundation removal, site clearing. You sure about this, boss? This is a beautiful house. I took one last look at the building. I saw the window where Vanessa used to wave to me when she came home from school. I saw the porch where Todd asked for my permission to marry her. I saw all the lies built right into the mortar. It has termites, I said, my face completely expressionless. Structural rot. Take it down. All of it. Where do you want us to start? Start with the primary bedroom, I said. Second floor, east corner. That was where they slept. That was where they plotted. Copy that, boss. The foreman signaled the excavator. The engine roared. And the hydraulic arm rose, blocking out the sun. I walked down the driveway, passing the machines, without looking back. I heard the first sound of shattering wood and splintering glass. It sounded exactly like a starting gun. I pulled out my phone. I had one last call to make, but it wasn't to Vanessa or Todd. I dialed the airline. I need a ticket, I said. One way to Rome, first class. Leaving tonight. The house was coming down, and I was finally taking flight. Arthur Pinter's office was located in a downtown brick building that had survived 3 earthquakes and 2 tech bubbles. Inside, it smelled of old paper and lemon polish. The scent of serious business. I walked past the receptionist who was just unlocking the front door. She looked horrified at my muddy boots and duffel bag, but I didn't stop, marching straight into the corner office. Arthur sat behind a desk that looked like it had been carved out of a single redwood tree. He was 70, with a thick mane of white hair and eyes that had seen through every lie a human being could tell. He was on the phone, but the moment he saw me, he hung up without a word. He took in my clothes, the dust on my shoulders, and the tight set of my jaw. "You look like you just walked off a job site, Garrison," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Or a war zone." "Both," I said, dropping the bag onto his leather sofa before sitting in the client chair. It groaned under my weight. I felt heavy, not tired, just weighed down by the gravity of what I was about to do. Arthur looked at me over his reading glasses. "I got your call last night and thought you were either drunk or having a medical emergency." "Demolition? Garrison, seriously? You built that house?" "I remember when you poured the foundation. You put a coin in the concrete for good luck. A silver dollar." "I remember," I said. "It was a 1922 peace dollar. Catherine gave it to me." I paused. The memory of my wife usually brought comfort, but today it brought total clarity. "It didn't bring us luck, Arthur. It just bought us time. And now, time is up." I reached into my bag and pulled out something far more dangerous than a weapon. It was a thick, leather-bound binder, cracked with age. The gold lettering on the spine was faded but clear. The Ford Family Trust. I slammed it down on the desk, sending dust motes dancing in the morning light. "You remember this?" I asked. Arthur looked at the binder and nodded slowly. 15 years ago, right after Catherine got her diagnosis, she wanted to make sure everything was secure, out of probate, so the government wouldn't take a cut. And she wanted to make sure Vanessa didn't have unchecked access, I added. Even back then, she knew. A mother always sees through things, Arthur. "She made me promise," she said. "Garrison, put everything in the trust. Make yourself the sole trustee. You're the only one who can sign a check, a deed, or a title." I opened the binder. The pages were yellowed, but the signature in blue ink was still bold and strong. "Todd thinks he's clever," I said, tapping the page. "He thought he could apply for a predatory loan using the house because he assumed it was in my name. He thought having a power of attorney gave him authority over the property. But it doesn't," Arthur said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Because you don't own that house, Garrison. The trust owns it. Unless that power of attorney explicitly gives him power as the trustee of the Ford Family Trust. And I know for a fact it doesn't, because I drafted it to prevent exactly this. Then he has nothing," I finished for him. "He's trying to mortgage a ghost. He promised a creditor a title he can't even touch." Arthur let out a dry chuckle. He's going to have a very unpleasant conversation when he gets back. But Garrison, this protects you. The trust protects the asset. You don't need to destroy the house to stop him. We just show the trust documents to the lender. The loan falls through. Todd gets sued and you keep the house. I shook my head. No, that's not enough. If I keep the house, they'll come back. Vanessa will cry. She'll bring Mia. She'll say they have nowhere to go and try to make me feel guilty. I'm old, Arthur. I'm tired. One day I might give in, or I might actually get sick, and they'll be waiting right there like vultures on a fence post. I leaned forward. I need to remove the bait. I need to erase the asset. I don't want to win a legal battle. I want to end the war. Arthur sighed, taking off his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. You're serious. You really want to sell it to Westlake? I'm entirely serious. Call them. Arthur reached for the phone, dialing a number from memory and putting it on speaker. Jim, Arthur said when the call connected. This is Arthur Pinter. I have Garrison Ford here with me. A pause followed before a booming voice filled the room. Garrison Ford? The man who swore he'd rather die than let me pave over his rose garden. What brings him around? I leaned closer to the phone. I'm ready to sell, Jim. Today. Another silence descended, long enough that I could almost hear Jim calculating why I was calling. Sell? Jim finally said, his voice cautious. You mean the lakefront property? The one you said you'd rather burn down than let me touch? That's the one. I waited. In a negotiation, the first person to fill the silence usually loses money. $3 million, Jim said. That was last year's offer. The market has cooled down since then. Garrison. Interest rates are up. I could maybe do 2.6. Maybe. And that's with a 30-day close after inspection. I don't have 30 days, I said. I don't even have 3 days. I need to close today. Today? Jim let out a sharp laugh. Garrison, you know how this works. Title searches, escrow, inspections. I can't move that kind of capital in 24 hours. You can, I interrupted. I know you, Jim. I know. You keep a liquidation fund specifically for distressed assets. I know you bought the Henderson property last month with cash because they were facing foreclosure. I'm offering you the same deal. I moved even closer to the speaker. $2 million flat, I said. That's $500,000 under market value, but I have conditions. I could hear the gears turning in Jim's head. Instant equity of $500,000 was an incredible amount of money, even for him. I'm listening, Jim said. What are the conditions? Condition 1, I said. A cash wire. The funds must hit the Ford family trust account by noon today. No checks, no promises, just the wire. Done, Jim said instantly. $2 million is heavy, but for that lot, it's an absolute steal. What else? Condition 2, I said, and this is non-negotiable. I require immediate transfer of possession upon receipt of funds, and I want the structure leveled. Demolition? Jim asked. You want me to tear it down? I want it erased, I said. The moment the ink is dry, I want you to roll your heaviest equipment over there. Dig up the foundation, crush the frame, and clear the site down to the dirt. I want it looking like a vacant lot by Friday morning. Why? Jim asked, his voice losing its competitive edge, replaced entirely by confusion. Garrison, that's a custom home. You spent 3 years on the woodwork alone. Why do you want me to destroy it? Because it's contaminated, I said. Contaminated? Jim asked. With what? Mold? Asbestos? With bad memories, I replied. I looked at Arthur Pinter, who was watching me with deep sorrow, but he nodded, encouraging me to continue. Listen, Jim, I went on, my voice hardening. You don't care about the house. You never did. You want the land, the footprint, to build your condos. The house is just an obstacle. 50 tons of wood and glass, standing in the way of your profit margin. I'm giving you permission to skip the preservation assessments and the material salvage. Just crush it. So, you're selling me the land for $2 million and throwing in a free demolition permit. Jim clarified. Exactly, I said. But it has to happen right now. Today. If that house is still standing on Friday, the deal is null and void. Jim was silent for a moment, doing the math. He was a practical businessman who knew the value of Seattle waterfront property. The dirt was the gold. The house was just the wrapping paper. Why the rush, Garrison? Jim asked softly. Is it because of the kids? He knew about Vanessa. Everyone in the business knew about Vanessa. They knew she was the reason I was still working at 70. The reason for my white hair. Let's just say I'm settling my estate, I said. I want to make sure there's nothing left for them to fight over. I get it, Jim said. Scorched earth. Do we have a deal? I heard the sound of a heavy chair moving and a pen clicking. I'll have the wire ready in 10 minutes. Send the deed and trust documents to my attorney. I'll have a demolition crew over there by 1 p.m. They just finished a job in Bellevue, so I'll divert them. 1 p.m., I said. Don't be late, Jim. I won't, Garrison. Honestly, I always liked that house. Beautifully built. Yes, I said, but nothing built lasts forever. I hung up the phone. The silence returned to the room. The deal was done. In just a few minutes, I had liquidated 30 years of my life, turning my home into a number on a balance sheet. Arthur Pinter let out a long breath, taking off his glasses to wipe them with his tie. You just sold a $3 million asset for $2 million, Arthur said. Todd is going to lose his mind. That's the point, Arthur, I said, walking to the window to look down at the busy street below. Todd thinks he has leverage. He thinks he has equity and is borrowing against a tangible asset. I turned back to the lawyer. But hard money lenders are strict, Arthur. They need a first position lien on the property. They need the collateral. Come Friday, when that creditor tries to record his lien on the title, he's going to find the title has already transferred. He'll find the property he thought secured his loan no longer belongs to Todd Miller or Garrison Ford. It belongs to Westlake Development. And since you're the sole trustee, Arthur added, a slight smile finally appearing on his lips as he caught on. And since you never signed the power of attorney, Todd committed fraud when he applied for that loan. He leveraged an asset he didn't own and had no right to touch. Exactly, I said. When the lender finds out the collateral is gone, the deal collapses. Todd doesn't get his $200,000. He can't pay back his creditor. And he can't send me to a facility because he won't be able to afford the admission fees. That's brutal, Arthur said. It's necessary, I replied. My phone buzzed on the desk with a notification from my banking app. I picked it up. Pending. Wire inbound. Westlake Development, LLC. Amount, $2,000. Jim moved fast. He didn't want to risk losing the deal either. I showed the screen to Arthur. The money's there, I said. Print the deed, Arthur. Let's make it official. Arthur printed the documents, the hum of the laser printer the only sound in the room. I signed my name over and over. Garrison Ford, trustee. With every signature, I felt lighter. I wasn't losing a home. I was shedding a skin. Once the papers were signed, scanned, and emailed to Jim's attorney, I stood up. "I need to go meet the crew," I said. "I need to open the gates." "You're going back?" Arthur asked. "One last time," I said. "I need to make sure they do it right. I don't want them saving the cabinets or salvaging the copper wire. I want it all gone." I picked up my duffel bag, which now held everything I owned. My clothes, my wife's ashes, my passport, a $2 million trust account, and a ticket to Rome. "Garrison," Arthur said, standing up and extending his hand. "You're an incredible contractor." I shook his hand, his grip firm. "I'm just doing a renovation, Arthur," I said. "A total gut job. Sometimes you have to strip a house down to the dirt to get rid of the rot." I walked out of the office and hailed a cab. The ride back to the house felt entirely surreal. I watched the city pass by, cranes, building new glass towers, traffic choking the avenues. It all felt distant, like I was watching it on a screen. When the cab pulled up to the gates of my former house, I saw that Jim was a man of his word. The street was lined with heavy equipment. A flatbed truck was unloading a massive excavator with a hydraulic claw, and a bulldozer was idling with a beastly rumble, waiting to be unleashed. The neighbors were all standing on their porches watching. Mrs. Higgins next door was peeking through her blinds. They probably thought I was finally doing the renovation Vanessa always talked about, completely unaware that I was performing an amputation. I paid the driver and walked up the driveway. The foreman, Mike, a burly man I'd known for years, was waiting for me looking utterly confused. "Garrison," he said, adjusting his hard hat. "Jim said full demolition. Said you sold it for land value. Is that true?" "It's true, Mike," I said. "Everything goes?" Mike asked, looking at the house. "The windows, the roof, the deck, everything?" "Everything," I said. Mike kicked at the dirt with his boot. "It's a shame, Garrison. This house was built solid. It's got good bones." "The bones have cancer, Mike," I said. "Crush it." I opened the front door one last time and walked through the empty rooms. The air felt heavy, filled with the ghosts of my life there. Catherine laughing in the kitchen. Vanessa taking her first steps in the hallway. Todd sitting on my couch drinking my beer like he owned the place. I walked out the back door and stood on the deck. The lake greenhouse shimmering in the afternoon sun. I checked my watch. It was 1 p.m. in Hawaii. At 10 a.m., Todd and Vanessa were probably eating breakfast, ordering mimosas and eggs Benedict, thinking about how clever they were. Thinking about Friday. Friday was going to be an incredibly bad day for them. I walked back to the front of the house. Mike was already in the cab of the excavator, looking at me for the signal. I didn't wave. I just gave a single nod. The engine roared to life. The hydraulic arm reached high into the air, its massive steel claw opening like a predator's jaw before swinging toward the house. It hit the roof of the primary bedroom first, with an earth-shattering crunch of breaking timber and snapping tiles that echoed through the hills. Glass shattered and drywall exploded in a white cloud of dust. I watched the claw tear through the walls, exposing the room where Todd and Vanessa slept, twisting their bed frame and collapsing the closet where Vanessa kept her clothes. It was violent, loud, and the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I watched for 10 minutes as the machines tore through the structure. The living room ceiling collapsed, and the kitchen walls buckled. The house I built with my own hands was being dismantled piece by piece. I turned away. I didn't need to see the end. I knew Mike would finish the job. By tomorrow, there would be nothing left but a large hole in the ground. I walked down the driveway, past the staring neighbors and the idling trucks, without looking back. I had a flight to catch. For the first time in 3 years, I was no longer watching the house. I was finally taking care of myself. Besogen. An hour before the heavy machinery arrived, before the first pane of glass shattered, I stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by the borrowed relics of my daughter and son-in-law's lifestyle. The room looked like a showroom for people with more credit cards than sense, featuring a curved OLED television, covering half the wall, and metallic sculptures Vanessa claimed were art, but were really just expensive dust collectors. I checked my watch, noting I had 45 minutes left. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a number for City Mission, a local charity that helps people get back on their feet. "I have a donation," I told the dispatcher when she answered. "A massive one. Clothes, electronics, furniture, high-end goods. But there's a condition. You need to get a truck here within 20 minutes. The dispatcher hesitated, stating their schedule was full, but her tone changed completely when I started listing brand names. Gucci, Prada, Sony, Apple. She promised to divert a truck immediately. While waiting, I went upstream to the primary suite. This was the room I had built for Catherine and myself, boasting the best view of the lake. Now, it smelled heavily of Todd's cologne and Vanessa's floral perfume, a scent that stayed too long. I opened the walk-in closet, which was bursting at the seams. Vanessa had hundreds of shoes lined up like soldiers on shelves, and Todd had suits he'd never worn because he had nowhere to work. Pulling a roll of black industrial trash bags from my back pocket, I tore one open and started on Todd's side, grabbing armfuls of wool suits and silk ties, stuffing them into the bags like old insulation. I found his watch collection, most of which I suspected were fakes, and swept them into a shoebox before tossing his gaming console, controllers, and headsets into another bag. Then I walked over to Vanessa's side. That was harder. I lifted a silver sequined dress she had worn to a gala the previous year, remembering how beautiful she looked. For a split second, I saw my little girl, who used to help me paint the fence in overalls. But then I remembered her voice, at the airport, telling me I was too old to fly, and the email where she agreed to abandon me just to avoid feeling guilty. I threw the dress into the bag, clearing the shelves of handbags, belts, and scarves, stripping the room bare with a surge of adrenaline. I wasn't stealing. I was the owner of the house, and anything left inside was abandoned property left unsecured during their departure. That was negligence. By the time the charity truck rumbled up the driveway, I had 12 massive black bags lined up in the foyer. The driver, a kind-faced young man, stared wide-eyed at the pile. "All of this?" he asked. "All of it," I said. "And the TV and sound system too. Take it all. If it doesn't fit, come back for a second trip, but move fast. This house won't exist in an hour." He didn't ask questions, and he and his partner began loading the bags. To them, it was a gold mine. To me, it was just debris. Watching them load, the truck brought a grim satisfaction, knowing Todd's suits would go to men looking for employment, and Vanessa's shoes would go to women walking miles just to survive. It was the first honest thing to happen in this house in years. As the loaded truck pulled away, a blue and white police cruiser turned into the street, slowing down as it approached my driveway with its lights flashing silently. Mrs. Higgins next door must have been watching the entire time, seeing the frantic activity and the black bags, assuming I was being robbed or had finally suffered a breakdown. Assuming The cruiser stopped at the edge of the driveway, and an officer stepped out. He was young, confident, and kept his hand near his belt as he walked up, scanning the open front door and the remaining bags. "Sir, are you all right?" he asked, looking between me and the house. "We got a report of suspicious activity and a large truck moving property." I stood on the porch in my work clothes, boots caked in mud and flannel covered in drywall dust, looking every bit like a squatter or a thief. "I'm fine, officer," I said, keeping my hands visible. "Just doing some heavy spring cleaning." The officer stepped closer, peering into the empty foyer behind me. "That looks like a bit more than cleaning. Sir, is this your residence?" "Yes," I said. "Could I see some identification and proof of ownership? We have a report that the homeowners are away in Hawaii." Classic Mrs. Higgins. She knew Vanessa's schedule and assumed I was just the hired hand or the confused father who was supposed to be watering plants, not liquidating assets. I reached slowly into my back pocket, pulling out my wallet and the folded deed I had just signed with Pinter. "My name is Garrison Ford," I said, handing him my license. "I built this house 30 years ago, and as of this morning, I am the sole trustee and owner of the property." The officer looked at the license, reviewed the deed, and read the legal description before handing the documents back, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Mr. Ford, sorry to disturb you." The neighbor was concerned. "She said your daughter lived here." "She used to," I said, intentionally using the past tense. "She moved out today." The officer scanned the muddy lot, watching Westlake Development's massive excavators slowly assemble at the base of the hill. "What's with the crew?" he asked, adjusting his belt. "Is this a demolition?" "Yes," I said. "I'm taking it down." The officer raised an eyebrow, looking back at the building. "You're leveling a perfectly good house?" "It has severe structural issues," I replied, my voice completely cold. "Deep rot. It's safer to just push it over." He stared at me for a long time. He was a cop. He knew when someone was bending the truth, but he also knew when a man was telling a version of reality that was none of his business. He saw the look in my eye. It wasn't the look of a criminal. It was the look of a man who had completely run out of compromises. "All right, Mr. Ford," he said, tipping the brim of his hat. "It's your property. Just try to keep the noise down after 5. "I'll be gone long before 5, I replied. The officer turned and walked back to his cruiser. I watched him drive away, knowing Mrs. Higgins was probably clutching her pearls behind her curtains. I turned back to the house. The charity truck was gone, the police were gone, and now it was just me and the machines. Mike, the foreman, waved from the cab of the primary excavator and pointed to his watch. Time was up. I picked up my small duffel bag. It was light, containing only the essentials. A photo album from my honeymoon with Catherine in Italy, her silver hair comb that had sat on the dresser for a decade. My passport, and the trust account checkbook. I walked down the steps, passing the meticulously manicured rose bushes lining the driveway. Vanessa loved these roses. She used to post pictures of them online with captions like "My Sanctuary" and "Home, Sweet Home." But she never watered them, and she never pruned them. They were just a backdrop for her vanity. I stopped in front of the bushes. They were in full bloom, deep crimson and soft as velvet. I reached out, touching a single petal. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I looked up at Mike and pointed at the garden bed. "Start right there," I shouted over the rumble of the diesel engine. "Take them out by the roots." Mike nodded, pulling a lever. The massive yellow machine pivoted on its tracks, its steel bucket hovering inches above the flowers. I didn't look away. I needed to see it. The bucket dropped, biting into the dirt, with a sickening crunch of tearing roots and flying mud. In one violent motion, the entire hedge was ripped from the earth. Red petals scattered through the air like confetti, mixing with the rising dust. The sanctuary was gone, the backdrop erased. It was shockingly simple. 30 years of growth wiped out in 3 seconds. The excavator swung, dumping the shredded bushes into the back of a dump truck before turning its attention back to the house. This time, the bucket raised higher, aiming directly for the front porch. The porch where I had sat with Catherine, watching the rain. The steel teeth crashed down onto the porch roof. The wood splintered, the support beams buckled, and the entire structure collapsed with a roar that shook the concrete beneath my feet. A white cloud of drywall and dust engulfed the front of the house. When it cleared, the front door was completely gone, leaving the foyer exposed like an open wound. I could see the stairs leading up to absolute nothingness. A strange sensation washed over my chest. It wasn't pain. It was pure release. It felt like dropping a crushing weight after a very long walk. I turned my back on the house, listening to the rhythmic, heavy thuds of the machine battering the structure like a steady heartbeat. I walked down the driveway, my boots crunching on the gravel, passing the for sale sign Todd had hidden in the garage to put up on Friday. The one I had already found and thrown into the dumpster. A yellow cab was waiting at the end of the street, called just 10 minutes prior. The driver was leaning against the hood, his mouth wide open as he watched the demolition. "That is quite a show," he said as I approached. "Somebody must have really hated that house." I opened the back door and tossed my bag inside. "No," I said. "I loved that house. That's why I couldn't let it stay standing to be ruined." I got into the back seat. The leather was cool, the air conditioning hummed, and the interior was entirely quiet, completely insulated from the violence outside. "Where to?" the driver asked. "SeaTac Airport," I said. "International departures." The cab pulled away. As we rounded the corner, I caught a final glimpse through the rear window. The excavator was tearing into the living room, and the roof line was already sagging. The house looked like it was bowing, completely surrendering. I leaned back and closed my eyes, no longer seeing destruction, but the future. A square in Rome, a glass of wine, and a phone ringing that I would never answer. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and went into the settings. I found Vanessa's contact, then Todd's. I didn't block them. That would be too merciful. I wanted to see the calls. I wanted to see the desperation. I wanted to see the exact moment they realized the ground beneath their feet had completely vanished. I slid the phone back into my pocket. "Step on it," I told the driver. "I've got a flight to catch, and I'm not too old to fly." The cabin of the Boeing 777 felt a world away from the dust and noise of the demolition site. Here, the air smelled of filtered oxygen and expensive leather. I sat in seat 1A, a window spot in first class. It was a private, enclosed pod where the seat lay completely flat into a bed. I had never flown first class before, always opting for coach to save money for the house, for Vanessa's tuition, or for a rainy day fund. Well, it was pouring now, and I was finally using the umbrella. A flight attendant with a perfect smile leaned over the partition. "Would you care for a glass of Cham before takeoff, Mr. Ford?" she asked. I looked down at my hands, clean but rough from years of labor. "Bring me a glass of wine," I said. The most expensive Italian red you have open. A moment later, she returned with a glass of Barolo. I took a sip. It tasted of earth and dark berries. It tasted like victory. I adjusted the seat as the plane began to push back from the gate, the vibration of the engines humming beneath the floor. It was an immense power, capable of lifting hundreds of tons into the air, and I felt a strong resonance with it. I had just exerted a similar force myself. As we taxied toward the runway, I pulled the phone from my pocket. I had turned it off on the way to the airport, but now I wanted to see the fallout. I wanted to see the blast radius. I turned it on and connected to the aircraft's Wi-Fi network. The device practically convulsed in my hand, buzzing continuously in a frantic staccato for nearly a full minute as a waterfall of notifications flooded the screen. 55 missed calls, 120 text messages, 14 voicemails. I didn't answer a single one. I felt entirely detached, carrying the calm clarity of a judge reading a final verdict. I started scrolling through the messages from the bottom up, wanting to track the exact timeline of their panic. The first message was from Vanessa at 11:30 a.m., right around the time the heavy machinery arrived. "Dad, Mrs. Higgins just called me. She says there are massive trucks in the driveway. Did the pool cleaners show up early?" I took another sip of wine, picturing poor Mrs. Higgins glued to her window. The next message came 10 minutes later. "Dad, answer your phone. Mrs. Higgins sent me a picture. There's a bulldozer on the lawn." "What is going on?" Then the tone shifted completely into sheer panic. "Dad, answer me. Why is there a hole in the roof? Mrs. Higgins says they're tearing down the house. Tell them to stop." I could hear her voice through the capital letters. That sharp, demanding tone she used whenever something didn't go her way. But this wasn't an incorrect restaurant order. It was her inheritance being turned into wood chips. Todd joined the thread next, his messages less hysterical, but far more threatening as he realized the financial implications. "Garrison, answer me right now. I'm watching a live stream from the neighbor. You have no right to do this. That house is collateral. Stop the machines or I'm calling the police." I let out a soft laugh. Collateral? He still thought he had a deal, completely unaware that the deal had died the moment he sent that text. I scrolled up as the messages dissolved into a stream of absolute desperation. "Vanessa, we're trying to book a flight back. There are no seats until tomorrow. Dad, please tell me this is a mistake. Tell me you're just remodeling. Todd, I called the cops, Garrison. They said they talked to you. They said you showed them a deed. What deed? You're senile. I will have you committed for this. You hear me? You're going to rot in a cell, Vanessa. The entire second floor is gone. Dad, my clothes were in there. My jewelry, my wedding dress. How could you do this? Todd, Vinny is calling me, Garrison. You have no idea what you've done. You've ruined us. You've absolutely ruined us." I paused on that last text. Ruined us. No, Todd. I didn't ruin you. I just took back the life jacket you were trying to steal from me. You chose to jump into shark-infested waters on your own. That was your problem. The plane accelerated down the runway, gravity pressing me back into the soft leather seat as the rain-slicked tarmac and hangars blurred past the window. Then the nose lifted, the ground dropped away, and we broke through the low clouds into absolute blue sky and sunshine. I looked back down at my phone. Even as we climbed, more missed calls from Vanessa and Todd popped up on the screen. They were trapped in paradise, watching their entire future collapse. in real time through text messages from a nosy neighbor, completely powerless to stop it. For 3 years, they held all the cards, treating me like a ghost in my own home. Now it was my turn to haunt them. I opened the voicemail app and played the latest message from Todd, holding the phone to my ear as the Pacific Northwest disappeared beneath a blanket of white clouds. Garrison. Todd's voice was distorted by anger, practically screaming into his phones from an airport terminal. Listen to me, you old fool. You can't sell that house. I signed a contract. I have money on this line. If that house isn't standing on Friday, I'm finished. You hear me? Finished. You better tell them to stop digging. I'm going to sue you. I'll. The message cut off as he ran out of breath or slammed his phone down. Sue me. Good luck with that, Todd. You can't sue a trust for disposing of its own assets, and you can't sue a man for dismantling a house he owns outright. You can try, but by the time the paperwork clears the court system, I'll be drinking espresso in a Roman piazza while you're busy explaining to Vinny why his 200 grand turned into a pile of splinters. I deleted the message, along with all the others. I didn't need to save them. The only sound I needed to remember was the crunch of that excavator tearing through the roof. I opened my contacts and found Vanessa's name. My thumb hovered over the block button, but I decided against it. Blocking them would be a mercy, giving them immediate closure. I wanted them to stew in uncertainty, sending messages into the void, wondering if I was reading them, wondering where I was, and wondering how a supposedly senile old man had outsmarted them so completely. I turned off the notifications and placed the phone face down on the tray table. The flight attendant returned. Is everything all right, Mr. Ford? She asked, noticing me staring at the blank screen. I looked up at her, my chest feeling lighter than it had in years. The suffocating weight of the past 3 years, the insults, the neglect, the fear of Sunnyside, was completely gone, left in the ruins on Lakeview Lane. Everything is absolutely perfect, I said. I'm just enjoying the quiet. We'll be serving dinner in an hour, she said. We have a prime rib or a lobster thermidor. I'll take the lobster, I said, and another glass of this wine, right away. I looked out the window as the sky turned a deep indigo, flying directly into the sunrise. I was 72, homeless, without an address, a car, or furniture. Yet I had never felt more at home. I closed my eyes to the hum of the engines, listening to it like a lullaby. Somewhere down below, my daughter was crying over a closet full of shoes that were currently being sorted by volunteers at a shelter, and my son-in-law was realizing his predatory debt was about to catch up with him. I took a deep breath. "You're too old to fly, Dad," she had said. I smiled into the empty cabin. "Watch me fly, sweetheart. Watch me fly." Sitting in a cafe in Rome, watching the rain wash over the cobblestone streets, I can picture their return perfectly. I don't need a crystal ball to see it. I have the flight tracking data and the detailed reports sent by Mrs. Higgins, who remained stationed on her porch with a pot of tea and a pair of binoculars. She later told me it was the best show she'd seen since the Carter administration. It had been 2 weeks since I boarded my flight. 2 weeks of peace for me, and 2 weeks of absolute chaos for them. They had been stuck in Hawaii, not because they wanted to extend their vacation, but because their credit cards were declined at checkout. They were forced to call Vanessa's mother, my ex-wife's sister, who hated lending money almost as much as she hated me, to beg for plane tickets home. They landed at SeaTac on a Tuesday afternoon into a cold, bone-chilling Seattle drizzle. They walked out to the parking lot to retrieve Todd's beloved Range Rover. But when he pressed the unlock button on the key fob, nothing happened. They wandered the rows of the parking lot for 20 minutes before finding an exact space where they had left it. The spot was completely empty. Todd called the police, assuming it had been stolen, only for the dispatcher to deliver the bad news after checking the plates. The vehicle hadn't been stolen. It had been repossessed. The lease was in my name, and the day I left, I canceled the automatic payments. The leasing company wasted no time, showing up with a tow truck and a court order. So there they stood on the concrete, soaked, penniless, and out of options. Forced to take a standard yellow cab, whose driver couldn't care less about their tans or their bad attitude. The drive from the airport to Lakeview Lane takes about 40 minutes with traffic. I can imagine the interior of that cab. Vanessa staring out the window, her face a mix of rage and dread, clutching the phone I refused to answer. Todd sat next to her, sweating despite the chill, checking his messages and praying for a miracle that was never going to come. As the sun began to dip behind the clouds, they turned onto our street. The block was quiet, the manicured lawns of the neighbors still green and perfect. Then, the cab slowed down. "Driver, are you lost?" Todd snapped, his voice cracking. "This is the right street, but I don't recognize this," he trailed off. The cab driver pulled over and put the car in park, turning around to face them. "Look, buddy, the GPS says this is the address," he said, gesturing through the rain-streaked windshield. "But there's no house here." Vanessa looked out the window and let out a scream of pure disbelief. The sound of a mind completely fracturing when confronted with a reality it refuses to accept. She scrambled out of the cab before it had even fully stopped, running across the pavement as her heels sank into the mud. Where my house had stood for 30 years, there was now just a massive hole in the earth, a perfect rectangle of absolute nothingness. The demolition crew had been thorough, tearing down the walls, digging out the foundation, removing the plumbing, and grading the dirt flat. It looked like an abandoned construction site. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, with a massive metal sign zip-tied to the front reading, "Westlake Development. Coming soon. Luxury waterfront condos. No trespassing." Vanessa grabbed the fence with both hands, shaking it frantically. "No!" she screamed. "No, no, no! My house! Where is my house? Where is my house?" She looked entirely unhinged, her hair frizzy from the damp air and her expensive vacation clothes splattered with mud, looking around wildly as if the house might be hiding behind a tree. Todd climbed out of the cab slowly, walking toward the fence like a man approaching the electric chair. He didn't look at the hole in the ground. He stared at the sign for Westlake Development. Everyone in Seattle real estate knew that name. Jim Westlake didn't collaborate. He only acquired. Todd dropped to his knees in the mud, staring at the sign, with his mouth opening and closing, silently. He was doing the math. Vinny expected the title transfer on Friday, and it was now Tuesday, 2 weeks later. Todd had been dodging Vinny's calls for 14 days, lying that the paperwork was delayed and that the asset was secure. He had promised a property that no longer existed as collateral for a $200,000 loan. Vanessa turned and lunged at him, pounding her fists against his chest. "You said you handled it," she screamed. "You said you talked to the appraiser. What about my bedroom, Todd? My clothes? My shoes?" Even in the face of total ruin, she was still worried about her shoes. Todd pushed her away weakly, his eyes completely vacant. "Shut up, Vanessa!" he hissed. Don't you get it? It's gone. He sold it. The old man sold it and tore it down. He gripped the fence, his knuckles turning white. How did he do it? I had the emails. My loan was approved. The cab driver honked Hull's horn and rolled down the window. Hey, folks, the meter is still running. Are you paying, or what? Todd fumbled through his pockets, pulling out a wallet with no cash, only maxed out credit cards. He looked at Vanessa, who glared back at him. I don't have anything, she spat. You spent the last of our cash on duty-free vodka. They had to endure one final humiliation. After the driver threatened to call the police, Todd handed over his watch as collateral just to get the man to leave. The cab pulled away, leaving them standing in the rain with their Louis Vuitton luggage and nowhere to go. That was when Mrs. Higgins emerged, walking down her driveway under a large umbrella. She didn't offer to share it, standing hermitsly on her side of the property line where it was safe and dry. Hello, Vanessa. Hello, Todd, she called out. You're back early. Vanessa ran toward her. Mrs. Higgins, you have to help us. Call the police. Someone stole our house. My dad. Something happened to my dad. He must have been kidnapped. Mrs. Higgins shook her head, taking a sip of tea from her mug. Nobody kidnapped him, dear. He left in a taxi 2 weeks ago looking wonderful, wearing a very nice suit. Where did he go? Vanessa pleaded, gripping the chain-link fence. He said he was heading to the airport. Mrs. Higgins replied calmly. Said he had a flight to catch to Rome or Paris, somewhere where the wine is better than it is here. Rome, Todd whispered. He's in Rome. Mrs. Higgins reached into her pocket. Oh, he left a message for you. Not a written note, but he told me if you ever came back looking for him, I should pass along a message. What message? Vanessa asked with desperate hope. Did he leave a key? Did he leave money? Mrs. Higgins smiled, a look she had been saving for 3 years after watching them treat me like a servant. He told me to tell you that the lawn doesn't need watering anymore. Vanessa froze, her face completely dropping. And he told me to tell you, Todd. Mrs. Higgins continued, turning her gaze to my son-in-law. The mailman came by yesterday, looking for you with a certified letter from a Mr. Vinnie K. It sounded important. He muttered something about a final notice. Todd let out a choking sound, scrambling backward away from the fence and Mrs. Higgins, as if she were the one threatening him. Vinnie knows, he gasped. He knows I'm back. Right at that moment, Todd's phone began to ring, the loud, jarring sound echoing down the empty street. He pulled it from his pocket and looked at the screen, all the color draining from his face until he looked like chalk. It's him, he whispered. Answer it, Vanessa said, her voice shaking. Tell him we have the house. Tell him it's just a renovation. Todd looked at the empty lot and the massive pile of dirt where the living room used to be. I can't, he said. I can't tell him that. He'll come here. He'll see. The phone kept ringing as Todd looked at Vanessa. We need to go, he said. We need to run. Run where? Vanessa screamed. We don't have a car. We don't have money. We don't have a house. I don't know, Todd shouted back. Anywhere. Just before he sends someone, he grabbed his suitcase and began sprinting down the street, dragging the heavy luggage as the wheels clicked against the wet pavement, never looking back at his wife or the property. Vanessa stood alone, looking at the vacant lot and then at Mrs. Higgins, who simply took another sip of tea, turned off her porch light, and left Vanessa in the dark. Vanessa pulled out her phone and dialed my number for the 56th time. In the Roman cafe, I watched my screen light up with her call, letting it ring until it rolled over to voicemail while I took a bite of my tiramisu. It tasted sweet and bitter all at once. Vanessa finally lowered her phone. Collapsing onto her luggage in the rain, right on the pavement, before the muddy pit that used to be her inheritance, burying her face in her hands and crying with the sound of total defeat. She had told me to take care of the house, and I had taken care of it perfectly, clearing it out and removing the garbage. Now, the land was ready for something new, something better, built on a foundation that wasn't cracked by greed. The Seattle rain continued to fall, washing away the last traces of the old Ford estate. But in Rome, the sun was just coming up. The morning light broke over Piazza Navona in a brilliant, almost surreal golden glow. I sat at a small iron table near the fountain of the Four Rivers, drinking a double espresso and watching the tourists take photos. It was 10 a.m. Italian time, which meant 1 lot a.m. in Seattle. My phone sat on the white tablecloth like a grenade with the pin pulled, waiting for one final detonation. I had ignored 55 calls, but now it was time to answer one. I needed closure to sign off on the project. I unlocked the screen and hit the video call button for Vanessa. She answered on the first ring, the picture grainy and dark, illuminated only by a street lamp. She was sitting on her suitcase in the rain, her hair plastered to her scalp and mascara running in dark tracks down her face, with the chain-link fence and the black void of her inheritance visible behind her. "Dad!" she screamed, her voice breaking through the static. "Dad, where are you? Why did you do this? My clothes, my life. It's all gone." I took a sip of my espresso, the flavor rich and intense. "Hello, Vanessa," I said calmly. "I hope you had a wonderful time in Hawaii. I heard the weather was beautiful." She stared into the camera, her mouth agape. "Hawaii? You destroyed my house while we were in Hawaii. You're crazy. You're completely insane. I'm going to have you committed for this. I'll tell everyone you're a lunatic." "It wasn't your house, Vanessa." My voice remained steady and cold. "It never was. It was my house. I built it, I paid for it, and then I decided I didn't like the tenants, so I evicted them." Todd shoved his face into the frame, looking like a cornered rat with bloodshot eyes, shaking visibly. "Garrison, listen to me," he hissed. "You committed fraud. You sold a property that was under contract. I had a deal. There was $200,000 clearing on Friday. You stole that money from me. Vinny is going to kill me. Do you understand? He's going to kill me." I leaned back in my chair, letting the sounds of the Roman morning filter through the microphone. "I didn't steal anything, Todd. You tried to mortgage a property you didn't own using a power of attorney I never signed. That's called mortgage fraud, and it's a federal felony. As for Vinny, that sounds like a personal problem. Maybe you should have gambled with your own money instead of betting with my life." Todd went pale, his voice dropping to a whisper. You knew about the loan." "I knew about everything," I said. "I knew about the gambling, the debts, and Sunnyside. I knew about Wing D." Vanessa flinched violently, averting her eyes from the camera, unable to meet my gaze, even in the digital world. "You were going to put me in a lockdown facility, Vanessa," I continued, dropping my voice to a whisper that pierced through the static. "You were going to medicate me and leave me to rot so you could buy designer bags and stay in 5-star hotels. You told Todd to make it clean because you didn't want to feel guilty. Well, don't worry, sweetheart. You never have to feel guilty again. because you no longer have anything left to feel guilty about. Dad, please, Vanessa sobbed. We have nowhere to go. Our cards are maxed out, the car is gone, and we're on the street. Just wire us some money. Just enough for a hotel room tonight. I looked at her, searching for any trace of the little girl who used to hold my hand. But she was gone, consumed by the monster she married and the greed she cultivated. I am not an ATM, Vanessa, I said. I am your father, or rather I was. But fathers protect their children, and children respect their parents. You broke that covenant. But what are we supposed to do? She wailed. Get a job, I said. Work, save, and build your own house. Maybe in 30 years, you'll understand what it feels like when someone tries to tear it away from you. I moved my thumb over the red end call button. Goodbye, Vanessa. Wait, Todd screamed. Wait, Garrison. Please. I cut the call, the screen going black. I set the phone down and signaled the waiter for the bill, feeling a deep sense of finality. The demolition was complete, and the site was cleared. The fallout in Seattle happened quickly, faster than I had anticipated. Without the house as collateral, Todd's house of cards collapsed within days. Vinny didn't bother breaking his legs. He did something worse, reporting Todd's fraudulent loan application and wire fraud scheme to the authorities to let the justice system do the dirty work. Todd was arrested 6 days later at a motel, charged with multiple counts of bank fraud and identity theft. I saw his mugshot online, wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed terribly with his complexion instead of an Italian suit. He faces 5 to 10 years in a federal prison, giving him plenty of time to read his motivational self-help books. Vanessa's fate was different. She wasn't charged, but she was left entirely destitute. The creditors took everything that wasn't nailed down. She tried to sue me, of course, finding a lawyer to work on contingency, to file a suit claiming I was mentally unfit, and that the sale of the property was invalid. Arthur Pinter crushed them in a single hearing, presenting the trust documents, Dr. Patel's medical records, proving my perfect mental health, and the neighbor's video footage of Vanessa standing in the rain, screaming about her shoes. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice and ordered Vanessa to pay my legal fees. Since she had no money, she was forced to declare bankruptcy. The last time I heard anything about Vanessa, she was working the drive-through window at a fast food joint in Renton. A friend of mine sent me a picture. She was wearing a paper hat and a headset, handing a greasy bag of burgers to a customer in a minivan. She looked exhausted. She looked old. She looked like someone who finally understood the true value of $1. Probably because she now had to stand on her feet for 8 hours just to earn a fraction of what she used to waste. As for Mia, I kept my promise. I set up an educational trust fund for her. It is locked down so tight, neither Todd nor Vanessa can ever touch a single cent of it. The money goes directly to her college. If Mia can shake off the toxic influence of her parents, she has a real future ahead of her. If she chooses to follow in their footsteps, she gets nothing. It's her choice to make, and it's already a hell of a lot more than I ever had when I was starting out. I stayed in Rome for 3 months before moving out to Tuscany. I rented a small villa nestled in the hills overlooking the vineyards. It is incredibly peaceful here. The air is clean. I spend my days walking, reading, and learning Italian. I'm not lonely. I have my memories of Catherine, and now that they aren't trapped in a place that was being poisoned by greed, those memories feel much happier. I used a portion of the proceeds from the land sale to establish the Catherine Ford Architecture and Design Scholarship. It's designed to help kids who actually want to build things. Kids who understand how to use both their hands and their minds. Every year, I fly back home to present the award. I fly first class, I wear a sharp suit, and I never ever go back to Lakeview Lane. Sometimes, as I sit out on my deck watching the sun dip below the Italian hills, my mind wanders back to that morning in the driveway. I think about the Uber, the luggage, and the way they looked at me. Like I was just a piece of unwanted furniture ready to be dropped off at a storage unit. They made a fatal mistake. They looked at my white hair and my slower pace and mistook it for weakness. They didn't see the structural steel holding everything up. They didn't see the foundation. They thought I was too old to fly. They thought I was trapped on the ground, clipped and caged. But they forgot that I was the one who built the cage in the first place, and only I knew how to dismantle it. I take a sip of my wine and watch a hawk soar over the vineyards, effortlessly catching the thermal currents. I just smile. They thought I was too old to fly. But I proved that my wings were forged from financial independence and self-respect. They haven't even learned how to get off the ground. The most profound lesson here is that silence isn't weakness. It is often the loudest strategy. Garrison Ford didn't waste his energy arguing with people who had already decided he was worthless. Instead, he let their own greed become the very trap that dismantled them. He proved that dignity isn't about clinging to a physical building or a legacy when it becomes toxic. Dignity is having the courage to level the site and start clean. True power belongs to those who know their worth and refuse to let anyone, even family, treat them like an asset to be liquidated. If you enjoyed this story of justice and resilience, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of people taking their power back. Let me know, down in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Garrison's shoes?